Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and welcome to our Wednesday Bible study recap. So, my computer died. Like, it didn't die itself, but the battery charger died, and so I'm waiting for a new one to show up. So, I'm going to be recording these things on my phone, so they're not going to be edited with any like precision or have pictures or anything like that because I just don't have the software to do it at the moment. So you're getting raw, unfiltered footage. It's like TMZ. What am I going to say? That's crazy. Well, today anyway, we finished up First Peter 5 and First Peter in general because that's the last part of First Peter. And so we went through the last part of it, verses 6 through 13, I believe. And we talked about kind of the call that Peter ends this with. And so Peter is finished up last week, right? Just to remind ourselves where we were. We finished up last week and we talked about how we have to submit to the elders, right? And the elders have to carry themselves in a certain way. They have to be humble. People have to humble themselves to the will of the elders. And Peter kind of wraps all of that up for us this week when he has us explicitly say, we all have to humble ourselves under the hand of God, right? And what does that mean, like to humble ourselves, right? Well, it means accepting God's will. It means accepting that we aren't in control, and that we need to understand that He is going to do things that we might find difficult or challenging, but we have to know that it is ultimately for His glory and for our good that we go through this thing. So he calls us to remember that, right? And he has a specific thing that he's calling us to do because of that, especially that congregation, right? He's calling it, especially that congregation, the context that is surrounding it is that persecution that's going on, right? And that's why he calls people to stand firm and be sober minded, right? To stand in that truth, because if they aren't humbling themselves, right? If they leave that, if they forget God's promises, right? Well, someone is out there trying to get them, and that person is the devil, right? And so, uh, the most tempted you're going to be to give up Christ is when your own life is threatened, right? That's like the big moment for a lot of people, right? And that's the thing that they're experiencing, and that's the thing that many churches are experiencing, as Peter alludes to in this little passage, right? And so if they're not on guard for that, they are going to fall away. And so he tells them, you got to be careful. You got to be on guard because Satan is looking to devour you, right? But we cling to God's truths. We humble ourselves before Him, because if we can make it to the end, then everything will be restored, right? Things will be made right. Satan will be punished. Justice will be done. All these things are good things, right? And so he ends this by saying we need to have a spirit of humility. And that's something we can apply today, right? In the United States, we might not be going through the same type of persecution that the early church was going through, right? Thank God. But we still have moments of weakness and times maybe where we are persecuted or difficult situations that we're in, and we need to remember that even though those situations are difficult, we need to kind of root ourselves to God, because if we don't, then we're going to fall away. So we got to be careful about these things, and trust in God's plan, and that can be through the suffering in our own life, right? Maybe things that aren't as bad as persecution, but some things may be as bad, like sickness or something that is very difficult, right? And that we can root ourselves knowing that we're humbling ourselves, or giving ourselves over to God and His plan. He's going to use that for what He needs to do, and we have to be ready to play our part in that as well. And then he ends with a few names that you might recognize. He ends by talking about Silas, or Silvanus is his other name. So, person who pops up in Acts and travels around with Paul, and he helps Paul out, and he's the carrier of this letter. And then we have the woman in Babylon mentioned. That's the church in Rome, right? Because Babylon is kind of the biblical example of the seat of evil empire, right? And Rome is kind of like that, although evil necessarily, maybe just the seat of empire. And so Peter uses that as a euphemism for Rome, which is all over the New Testament, right? You can look at the book of Revelation for that. And then you have him mention Mark, who is the guy who wrote our gospel, Mark, who traveled around with Peter, who sends his greetings from Rome as well. And then this is the part that we spend a good amount of time on at the end, kind of laughing and having some fun with. But we talked about this greet each other with a holy kiss, and I pointed out that was a full kiss on the lips, right? Which could have been between everyone or just between people of the same sex. We don't really know quite well. People are divided on that, but it's just funny to imagine ourselves giving each other that greeting, right? And it's meant to be kind of an exchange of promise between people, right? That there's a family bond between the churches, right? Standing together in face of this persecution. And we talked about our own experience with like, kissing amongst family members and whether or not we liked it, and not most people don't. And I'm not huge on it either, to be honest. And so it was just funny to talk about. But that's what we talked about. So we finished up First Peter today, and we're moving into Second Peter next week, which is only 3 chapters, but it'll be a few weeks in that as well. So yeah, that's what we talked about. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you tomorrow for our mailbag. Peace out.